Hello everyone, I'm Mars, and today's section we will talk about how to priority for effective action for a predictor model for quantifying the risk of active directory attack. And we already know that active directory attack or technique, primitive, how to abuse primitive things, already be major things in the active directory war. So there are many cyber attacks compromised to the entire domain already. But unfortunately, the blue team guys or the defender, they don't know how to take some action to their active directory environment because they don't know what kinds of attack techniques in their environment, what kinds of potential attack in their environment. So they don't know that. Even they don't know how to prioritize which kinds of attack technique first, or second, or third one. So in this session, we will propose a normal and practical model for told you guys how to apply a practical risk and calculate the risk for the active directory based on different attack technique or primitive things. And I'm Mars. I'm the research manager of TX1 Networks, and we come from Taiwan. And also, I also is executive director of Association of Hacks in Taiwan, and also I organize a conference called HICON. And also we focus on the ICS SCADA, IoT malware analysis, or kinds of enterprise security things. And I spoke at kinds of conferences such as Red Hat USA, Europe, ISA conference, DEFCON, HICON, Sector, and also is an instructor of HICON training, or Ministry of National Defense in Taiwan. Also, Dexter, my colleague, is a researcher and works for TS1 too. And also he's a supervisor of Association of Hacks in Taiwan. He focuses on red teaming, he focuses on active directory security, and also spoke at these kinds of conferences, including Red Hat Middle East and Africa, Code Blue, HICON, and CyberSec. Okay, so today's online here, we will quickly go through the AD overview and what kinds of challenges we face. And based on this challenge, we propose a model, a risk model for AD. Then we told you how to apply the risk model for quantification for attack vector part and attack path part. And that's one we will deliver how to the strategy for the risk management. So first things, we already know the AD directory. They are key component for the LDAP, for the Microsoft Kerberos and DNS. But in this moment, still many people ask me, how many people use AD directory in their enterprise? So here is a reference, here is an analyze. We know over 90% enterprise use AD directory in this moment. And also, no matter hybrid part, on-prem part, or only Azure part, but they use AD in their environment. So we know that, routing guys know that, and attack also know that. They already have a bunch of attacks or threat group use the group policy, use the active directory technique to compromise, to take over entire domain. For example, in LockB 2.0, they already embedded the group policy abuse in their ransomware. So routing guys know, attackers know how to compromise their AD environment, but routing need to know that. But why we always say the AD attacks are hard to detect and defend? So here is a reason we propose. First things, misconfiguration. Misconfiguration are hard to discover, fully discover. In your environment, you maybe have 100, 1,000, 10,000, or maybe almost sometimes of 100,000 domain user, domain computer in your AD environment. In this situation, you are hard to discover all misconfiguration. And even you can discover all misconfiguration, you are hard to implement the detection mechanism or prevention or a protection mechanism in your AD environment. Then, you also hard to enumerate all attack paths in your AD environment. Even we use block hunt, but in your huge environment, there are too many attack paths. You are hard to enumerate all one, and you are hard to priority which attack path, which attack vector you should take action first. So Based on this, we want to solve this problem because we want to show how to prioritize. We want to show which, let everyone know which things we need to first, which attack technique for AD we need to take action first, or the attack path we need to take action first. So we propose a model. We propose a risk quantification model for AD. Okay, and in this model, we only focus on those attack techniques, kinds of misconfiguration or primitive. We not cover vulnerability about AD server or AD. We only decide for those misconfiguration things in this risk quantification model. So in this model, we study many math model, many mechanism, or everything we studied, but we address one thing is we would like to make everyone can easily to apply this model. So we choose the most easy part, most easy applied method to make everyone can apply this model. So we back to original for the risk. Risk is likelihood times impact in the overall risk standards. So here we define some terms here, including attack vector, threat source, likelihood, and impact. So attack vector is attack technique. We only focus on those technique means abusing active directory feature. And also, threat source is those attack can have certain access right to access those certain object can initiate this attack vector. So here we will use the threat source to initiate attack vector and make some impact. So likelihood here is probability for attack who can initiate the attack vectors and cause the impact. Okay, so impact is we will define later here. So we already know risk is likelihood times impact, and likelihood is threat initiation times threat occurrence and adjusted by the predisposing conditions. So threat initiation is probability for attack who can initiate this attack vector, and can initiate this attack vector, but that may not 100% success. So we also have the other object for threat occurrence. This threat occurrence is a success rate for the initiate attack vector. So it's binding 1. And then we have the adjust value for the predisposing condition. And this predisposing condition is a variable, totally different based on different entire domain. Different enterprise will have different situation, including maybe password policy, maybe some detection mechanism already deployed in their environment. So some adjust value will based on predisposing condition to change. So it's a likelihood here. So we deep dive to the threat initiation part. So we would like to make this model to more easier to apply. So we choose the key point for the AD environment is user, is account. So for the threat initiation, we choose to the coverage for a coverage percentage of account. So we have account having the right of all accounts in the domain as a threat initiation, here. Okay, so the account, we cover 2 parts. One is user account. The other one is computer account. So the definition for threat initiation is like here is how many percentage have the percentage user can be initiated this attack vector. If more than 90%, we will define this very high, and semi-conductive value will be 5. Depends on how many percentage user can initiate this attack vector. We have some example later. And also, for the threat occurrence, after the attack vector initiated, how the success rate for those attack vector can achieve the result. We will also calculate the percentage in the threat occurrence. So if the success rate is 100%, if we initiate this attack vector and we most success, we will define this very high to the 5 is our threat occurrence, and depends on this 70% to 99%, 30% to 69%, we have different level here for threat occurrence. And after that, we can calculate likelihood. But also, we will adjust by this value by predisposing conditions. It's a variable, we say, but we also provide some standard for here. For example, some kinds of settings, these environment settings can affect the attack vector directly. You can choose adjust value to 5. For example, we change the Kerberos encryption type from RC4 to AES to 128. We can change this, and if we can change this, we will, based on this value, we provide the address value here. Also, if we have some detection mechanism here, or some security policy, we can have a different address value here, based on the different environment or different enterprise usage. Okay, so we already know threat initiation, threat occurrence, and also predisposing condition. So we can calculate the likelihood based on these two matrices. Based on these two matrices, we can calculate is likelihood here, and which is very easy part. We can calculate the result because we know that if we we propose a too difficult model, it's hard to deploy and hard to apply it. And also, when we get the result of likelihood, we can deep dive to the impact part. And for the impact, we also mapping to the AD feature is what kinds of privilege or permission we get after attack initiate this attack vector. So, for example, if this attack vector initiate and success, and attacker can directly or indirectly to obtain the domain administrative access, such as domain admin, such as domain controller, and vice domain, we can define this impact will be very high, and the semi-quantitative value will be 5. If we only get some domain privilege access for domain management, such as account operator, backup operator, we will define the quantitative value will be 4. So based on this, we can calculate the impact part here. And then we can compute the final risk here. It's likelihood times impact to get the final risk. And based on this risk result we get, we can prioritize the different attack vector in our environment. And the blue team guys will know which attack vector we should take action first. Because we know, usually in the enterprise guys and in the InfoSec or blue team, they usually have only limited resource. So based on this limited resource, we need to make everything have maximized the benefit for the blue team. So we need to take this risk for the environment here. So now, let us apply some real world case here. So first thing is Kerberos team. First sample is Kerberos. It's very easy to understanding is the definition. Before we perform the different risk assessment on the different attack vector or attack path, we need to know what kinds of things or concept behind those attack techniques. So for Kerberos team, it's like this when a service principal NAND is set on the domain account, and every domain user in this domain can request it with the value TGT and can request the service ticket for those account registered as peer. And also, the key concept for Kerberos is offline tracking for the brute force attack, right? So everyone can request this service ticket. So attack just need to know what kind of success rate is, calculate the brute force rate, how many percentage they can successfully crack the password here for the Kerberos definition. And also, when we perform the risk assessment, usually we have some scope limitation. So we use risk assessment objective to limit it. For example, if we would like to assessment on the entire domain environment, we use like this description here. We perform a Kerberos risk assessment for the entire domain with the default domain setting, default domain configuration. But if we would like to make assessment on the specific group, for example, IT group, R&D group, or anything else, we use the risk assessment objective to limit the scope. So based on this RA objective, we can calculate, we can narrow down, we can analyze everything we need, including threat initiation, threat occurrence, and predisposing condition. So based on this objective, we calculate, we get to the threat initiation part. We already know for code bursting, in the domain, every domain user, every attack can initiate, can request a service ticket. So the authenticated domain user 100% can request the service ticket. So the threat initiation will be 100%, will be 5. And threat occurrence will depend on the success rate for the loss, the success rate for the cracking, the brute force, the password hash. So will be success threat occurrence here. So we need to analyze different parts, and also we narrow down the based on the objective. We say based on the default domain configuration setting. So for the configuration setting, we assume the default setting is the password policy will be a length of 7, and every 42 days need to change once. So after this, and also we choose the hash rate for RC4 encryption by the default settings, and we get the if we need to crack or situation for the password hash, we need to 65 days, and then the success rate will be 64% based on every 42 days need to change. So we get the threat occurrence is 3, it's moderate. And also we can choose what kinds of predisposing condition in the specific environment setting. But based on this, we only use the default domain environment setting. So without any defense detection mechanism or other specific situation. So here just for reference, not in our risk calculation. So we get the likelihood here for the threat initiation and threat occurrence. We get 15 is high, for the likelihood is high, and the impact part will based on what kinds of account we get, what kinds of account we successfully forced. So for domain administrator, for the MS SQL Service account, there are different impact level. For the domain administrator, we based on our impact definition, they are get a domain administrative access. So will be 4 times 5, the risk will be 20. It will be very high. But for MS SQL Service account, there only is a specific server management level. So the impact will be moderate. So the risk will be 12. So based on this, we can calculate based on different part. We need to take action first on the domain administrator account for the preventable code bursting attack. And also, if we have predisposing condition, if we make this domain environment disable RC4 encryption, so we can get the likelihood different. So based on this adjustment, the likelihood will be 10, and also calculated risk will be totally different here for the reference. And okay, so it's the first sample. And second one is more complicated because we usually see the A0 abuse issue in the domain we compromise it. So for the A0 abuse, every resource, every object in the domain is object. So they have access control list in their environment. So basically, there are 2 types of ACL. One is genetic right, and the other one is object-specific right. So for example, like right owner, right decal, genetic R, genetic right. So we will base on this to calculate the risk for the ACL abuse technique. And also, some people will ask, so what kinds of different for those ACL abuse object, what kinds of impact, what kinds of usage can be abused it? So for different accounts, for different type object, we list the impact or the abuse primitive we can use. For user account, we can force change the password, or we can set the SPN to the user account, perform the targeted code bursting attack. For computer account, for domain group, for organization unit or domain object, will be different impact or different operation. And in the ACL abuse part, the objective here, we need to perform the ACL abuse risk assessment on the 2 users, Dexter and administrator, and the 2 ACL. One is a user force change password, the other one is genetic OR, also with default domain environment configuration setting. So we need, in this RA objective, we need to find what kinds of ACL can be abused for those 2 users. So first one, we need to narrow down thread initiation, thread accuracy, how to calculate thread initiation and thread accuracy. So for thread initiation, we need to find the account coverage with the account granted ACL. Then we know, based on default setting, when ACL is configured, the attack can abuse 100%. So the success rate will be 100%. So accuracy will be 5 here. And also based on different predisposing condition, we can choose one we have or the environment have. And also the impact will be determined by the label of assets on the domain object. What kinds of domain object they get, attack get, and we based on this calculate the impact part. So here, we find one user 01, domain user, have the ACL abuse primitive for user force change password to Dexter. So we find at least only one user. So based on our thread initiation, the one user is less than 25% in this environment, in this domain environment. So thread initiation will be 2. Accuracy will be 5, so we calculate the likelihood 10. And for domain object Dexter, domain user Dexter is a general user account, so the impact will be 2 because they only have a specific limited the user access right. So we can calculate the risk here, it's a 6. But next one is we find a domain group everyone have a genetic OR to domain user Dexter. So everyone in the domain is 100% for thread initiation. And thread accuracy 5, so likelihood is 25, but Dexter still is general user account, so impact will be 2. So we get the risk will be 10 here. And also, next one is most common situation we usually see is the IT group have genetic OR to the domain administrator. So the IT group, we assume that this domain group, this IT group with 30% of account. So thread initiation will be 3. And thread accuracy will be 5 because when we initiate this attack vector, always success. So likelihood will be 15. And based on the impact, the administrator is domain highest privilege in the domain administrative access. So the impact will be very high and we get a risk. So in the environment, in the routine, if they want IQ assessment perform the risk assessment on the ACL abuse, they need to make their risk assessment objective and calculate the different risk, find the OR situation and calculate the risk, and get the final result for the risk different 20, 12, or 6. And they can get the priority, which part they need to mitigate, they need to take action first. But sometimes we know if we only focus on attack vector, it cannot cover the OR situation in the entire domain. So we also revise the model little to make this model can apply to the attack path for the risk quantification. So next, I will hand over to Dexter. He will introduce the attack model, how to apply this to the attack path part.
Okay, mic check. So previously we've seen how we can do the risk quantification for the attack vector. For the second half of this presentation, I'm going to see how we can do that on the attack path as well. So we're going to start by explaining why we need the risk quantification for the attack path. With the explanation for the concept of it, followed by a demonstration example. So why we need the attack path risk quantification. The reason is simply because doing the attack vector risk quantification is not comprehensive enough. So here we're seeing on the bottom left, we have local admin attack vectors. And because it's just a regular domain computer, and so we have the impacts of 2 and followed by the likelihood with 3. And therefore, we have the low risk local admin attack vector in this example. And it just happened that this domain computer, workstation 01, is one of the account granting the ACL generic O to the domain administrator account. So here we're seeing a low risk attack vector can be trained that still result in a high risk effect. That basically it doesn't, it's not really reflect the risk we're seeing in this case, which the local admin attack vector should not be just a low risk attack vector. So here we're seeing that it should be viewed from an attack path where the attacker can indirectly obtain the domain admin privilege. So in this attack path, we're saying that multiple domain users could be compromised by the attacker and leverage the local admin that compromised the domain computer workstation 01 and leverage further for the ACL abuse. So eventually attacker obtain the domain admin privilege by compromise the domain administrator account. Okay, so this is basically why we need the risk quantification for the attack path. So next, let's see what is the attack path. So in our definition, we're saying the attack path is formed by chaining multiple attack vectors. So as we were saying previously, the first one is a local admin, and the target of the account happens to be a next attack vector, the account that can initiate the next attack vector. So this is why we're saying that chaining for multiple attack vectors. So the risk produced is by assessing vector as a whole. So we're saying that these chaining multiple attack vectors and looking for the corresponding likelihood and impact. And so therefore, previously we were saying the definition for the risk quantification for the attack vector. So now for the attack path, the risk factors will be a little different, and it's basically slightly modified to fit the view for the attack path. And so for the likelihood, first we're seeing the threat initiation value. So the idea is the same. We're saying which account, how the likelihood for the attacker can initiate the attack vector. That's what we were saying earlier. And now for the attack path, we're trying to view what is the sum of all the accounts who can initiate the attack vector inside this path. So the idea is we assume attacker can compromise any vectors by compromise any of the accounts in this path and step on to this path and follow until the end of it. So therefore, to reflect the real likelihood, we also want to remove the duplicate. So maybe for a domain admin account, we can initiate the first attack vector, which can be a local admin to multiple computer, or can be a last one, it's ACL abuse, and which also granted to the domain admin account by default. So that's for the threat initiation value. For the threat occurrence value, we're assuming the attacker on this attack path will always move until the end of it. So for example, first we have a local admin attack vectors, and second there will be a logon session, and next of it will be the ACL abuse. And the idea is attacker will always want to obtain the highest privilege in this domain or target certain, let's say, a database server. So we're assuming in this attack path whether the final attack vector is which one. It doesn't how do I say? It doesn't really matter. It's just that we assume attacker will move until the end of it to achieve its objective. And for the predisposing condition, we're also taken from the last attack vector for the same reason as the threat occurrence value. Finally, the last risk factor, we have the impact value. So the impact, based on what we previously explained for the attack vectors, it's used as a factor to replace attackers' domain privilege, domain access. So for the attack path, it's take from the highest value from the vector inside its path. The idea is that once the domain access is obtained by the attackers, it will remain there. So, for example, if an attacker can have an administrator in the first attack vector, it just remains there, it will not be removed for the second one or the final one. So that's why we take the highest value from the vectors inside this path. So for the next slide, the risk quantification formula is the same. The idea for the risk is also the likelihood times the impact. And we're also using the matrix to quantify the risk and also quantify the likelihood as well, which is the product of a threat initiation and the threat occurrence minus or as the predisposing condition. So here we're seeing the example. So in this attack path risk assessment example, the objective is to assess any attack paths that match the scenario we define. So here for the first attack vector, we have a local admin. And next to the local admin will be the logon session, and it happened to be have a user who have an abusable ACL privilege and allow attacker to perform the DC sync on the compromised account. So this attack path will assess 4 attack vectors from the domain users with a local admin to the DC sync permission to the domain on the end of it. So let's have a brief explain for what this attack vector is in case someone did not really know it. So for the local admin, we're assessing the users, domain users, or domain computer. It's just a principal, domain accounts. We have a local administrator who is a member of a local administrator group. And it's usually leveraged by attacker for the remote command execution, such as SMB exec or WMI exec. And for the DOM logon session, it basically means that if a user log onto a computer, their credential will live on the computer, and it usually allows the attacker to DOM its credential and use this user identity by DOM the credential from the LSAS process memory. And for the ACL abuse, Mars just did a wonderful explanation for us. Basically, we're abusing the domain rights on the account for the lateral movement, or what is so-called a domain escalation. And for the final attack vectors, we have the DC sync attack vectors. And it is a use, originally was used by the domain controllers or other service to synchronize the domain Active Directory database. And it can be also leveraged by attacker to obtain this AD database by synchronize this database and use as a way to obtain the password hash for the domain account. So here we're seeing the example for how we analyze and how we do the risk quantification of it. So first we have the threat initiation analyze. So in this attack path, we enumerated each attack vector for the account who can initiate them, and we found that there is the sum of the total account is 156. And in this environment, we found that there is the entire domain has a 1,000 account. Therefore, we have the coverage percentage, which is 15.6%, and therefore we have the threat initiation value, which is 3, or the level is moderate. And for the threat occurrence value, we assume that the last attack vector, which is the DC sync attack vector, the success rate is 100%, and it's just, in this case, is the example demonstration. So the numeric value is 5, corresponding level is very high. So here we're seeing the 156 account, and this basically means that for any one of this 156 account, if it's compromised attacker can follow in this attack path and perform the DC sync, compromise the domain. So in this attack path, performing DC sync, compromise the domain is the objective for this attack path. And for the impact value, we have the DC sync attack vectors as an impact value because it can be used to obtain the password hash for every account in this domain. And therefore, we have the risk value, numeric value for this attack path, which is 20, with corresponding level is high. So here we're seeing how we can do the risk quantification for the attack path. And we can define multiple attack paths and compare the value of them and prioritize our work on the attack path. So for this example, let's assume that this attack path had the highest value in this risk assessment project, which is 20. And the next question is that here we're seeing the multiple vectors inside this path. So it's already prioritized, this path is already prioritized, but which vector should we work on first? So here, we also will want to, after the risk assessment for the attack path, we also will want to do the assessment for each vector as well. And the reason is, of course, we want to mitigate all of the vector in this path. And it just happened that we all know that it can only be done if we have the unlimited resource. And as we all know, there's only limited resource we can do for the mitigation. So vectors in the attack path should be prioritized for the mitigation. Therefore, we can have an effective defense. So in the risk, for the risk assessment in this in this context, for assessing vectors inside this path, we're assessing under the context of attack path, and therefore we will have the risk value associated with the attack path, and this is why we can do the prioritization for the attack vector inside this path. So how we can do it is by defining our risk assessment area objective differently from how we are seeing for assessing the attack vector alone. And basically, we're defining to limit the assessment scope for the attack path only. So for the likelihood value, the threat initiation value will be determined by the previous attack vectors. So except the initial one, each attack vector followed by another one will be determined by them. So first, we have the local enemy attack vectors. Our RA objective will be the domain users enumerated in this attack path who have a local admin privilege to one or multiple domain computers. So therefore, our threat initiation analyze will be previously we're seeing 156 users, and there is 35 users having local admin privilege to 60 computers. And therefore, we're using this 156 users as a base, and we have the coverage percentage, which is 22%. And with the corresponding threat initiation value is 2. And for the threat occurrence analyzer, we're just assuming once this privilege is granted, the attacker can just abuse it for the remote command execution. So in this example, the success rate is 100% with the corresponding 5 numeric value. And therefore, we have the risk, the likelihood for this attack vector inside this path, which is 10, and it can be converted to the numeric value is 3 with moderate level. And for the impact, in this example, we just found out that one of the computer was hosting some service, and for the service computer, the impact will be 3 with the moderate level. And therefore, finally we have the risk value for these attack vectors, the local and mean, in the context of attack path we're trying to do the assessment, which is 9 and the low level. For the next attack vector, we have a download sessions. So previously, we assessed the local and mean attack vectors, and we found that there are 60 computers. So for this 60 computer, we try to assess that how many computer has some logon session, and this will be our objective. So for the threat initiation, we have 60 computers from the previous attack vector, and 30 computers happen to have 40 logon sessions. So therefore, we have 60 computers as our base and 30 computers, and there will be 50% coverage percentage, which will be for the threat initiation value will be 3. And for the threat occurrence, for the same reason, we assume that the success rate is 100%. It's just for the demonstration purpose, and therefore we have the likelihood, and the impact is 2. Is because in this example that we've only found that it's only domain user from the logon session, regular domain users. For the next attack vector, the ACL abuse, the RA objective, the risk assessment objective, is also followed by the previous one. So previously, we were saying that there are 40 logon sessions, and it just happened. These 40 logon sessions are all individual domain users. So for the ACL abuse RA objectives, we assess ACL abuse for the users from the previous logon session. And for the threat initiation value, it's for 40 users from the previous logon session, and 30 of them have abusable ACLs. So therefore, we have the coverage percentage, which is 75%, and which means that the threat initiation value is 4 with the level is high. And for the threat occurrence value, we also assume that once this ACL is configured, or in other words, it's granted, the attacker can just abuse the right. So therefore, the success rate is also 100%. And let me emphasize this again, is for the demonstration purpose. And for the every environment, and it can be different. So for example, if a cycle is configured, the likelihood will be different if we can minus the predisposing conditions. So in this example, we have the likelihood is 20, and it's converted to the quantified value is 5, and the level is very high. And for the impact, since the user for the next attack vectors, we have the DC sync, which can be the administrative privilege, and therefore the impact is 5. So the risk we are seeing here is 25 in general for this attack vector ACL abuse, and it's also in the context of a attack path we define and we try to assess. And finally, the level is very high. So for the final attack vector, which is DC sync attack vectors, and as we previously mentioned, the DC sync attack vector is for user, or we're saying that it's a principle granting the domain replication privilege, and it's used to replicate or synchronize the AD database. So the risk assessment, the RA objective in this attack vectors, for this attack vector, we try to assess DC sync privilege for user from the previous ACL abuse target, which is the users. So previously, we're having 30 users have abusable ACL. And so for these 30 users from the ACL abuse target, we found that there are 10 users having DC syncs right. And therefore, we have the coverage percentage, which is 33%. So the strain initiation value, we have 3, and with the level is moderate. And for the threat occurrence, we also assume that it's 100%, so therefore it can be explained that once DC sync privilege is configured, we can just use the replication right to dump the AD database and use it to obtain the password hash for every account in this domain. So it's also fine, and we have the likelihood value, and we can also use to calculate or quantify the risk value for this attack vector, which is 20. So after all this assessment is done, after we have the risk assessment for each attack vectors, which is assessed in the context of this attack path, we can clearly see that the ACL abuse has the highest risk value and it should be prioritized first. And maybe for the next one will be the DC sync, which is the second highest one. So as we have the table shown right here, it's for various quantified risk value, we can use this value to help us for the prioritization to start our mitigation works on the attack vectors. So for the final sections, we have the strategy for the risk management. So after we have a risk assessment for the quantified risk value for the attack vectors or the attack paths, and let's see how we can follow. Is there any strategy we can follow to start our mitigation efforts, or how do we invest our resource? So after assessment for the risk quantification, we can clearly prioritize our work for the highest risk value possible. And the first thing we will always try to do is to remove the configuration settings or the domain access right that enable and attack vectors. So for example, previously we were seeing the curve roasting, and if there's any account that doesn't need it, we can just remove the service principal name from the property setting for this account. And we're also seeing the ACL abuse, so it's always the good way to remove the account which is not necessary for the granting right that can be abused. So this is for the risk avoidance. However, in most cases, we cannot completely avoid an attack vectors. So in this case, as a last resort, we can also try to reduce the risk. And it is done by using the risk factors to guide us in the mitigation efforts. So first of all, we have a strain initiation value. And so for the strain initiation value, we're trying to see how many accounts can be compromised, that can be compromised by an attacker and then initiate the attack vectors. So these accounts should be assessed or should be evaluated and try to remove them for the access right granted or the configuration setting. So it's a way to reduce the strain initiation value, and therefore we can reduce the likelihood and reduce the risk eventually. So for the threat occurrence, we can try to decrease the success rate by enabling more secure setting. So for example, previously we're seeing the curve roasting attack. So it could be possible, but not recommended. And so we can remove we can try to disable the RC4 encryption type, and therefore only AES encryption is available inside this domain. And this also means that the attacker will have more hard time on decrypt the password, and therefore we decrease the success rate. For the predisposing condition, we can try to enable them for the attack vector as well, and this will also reduce the likelihood as we seen earlier. So, for example, we can try to establish some detection mechanism. So, for example, for the Kerberos thing, we can try to detect which encryption type is being requested, and is the most common way for detect a Kerberos thing. Or for the ACL abuse, we can try to configure some cycle for detecting the ACL abuse attack vectors. For the final risk attack, for the final risk factor, we have the impact values. So it's always a good way to evaluate these domain account who happen to be the target of an attack vector for the privilege granted. So I know it's been heard of a lot of time, but just enough privilege is the best way to explain in this case for the impact value. So this will be the final for our presentation, and thanks for your listening. And for more detailed concept explanations, we have a white paper release, and there will be more on our website as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your talk. Are there any questions? Leonard, please.
Yeah, I can use the privilege of already having the microphone. So imagine if I have an attack vector that involves one machine, for example, a terminal server, and like 50% of my domain users are able to RDP into that server, and the other 50% of my users are an actual administrator already to the server. Would that change the risk assessment somehow? Because for 50% of the users I compromise, I would still need a privilege escalation to use the path successfully. But for the other half of my users, if I compromise them, it makes my life as an attacker way easier. Should I pay attention to that when doing this modeling, or doesn't that matter at all?
You're saying that basically we're trying to assess there's a computer who happens to have a 50 user in the administrator and 50 user who happen to be in the remote user group. Is that correct? Try to be clarified?
Yeah, just
okay.
as an example.
So
100% of my users can access it, but 50% are already an admin, and the other 50% would need a privilege escalation to use the path for, like, for example, I can then only dump credentials from that computer.
I think it basically we can do is try to define our risk assessment objective. So in this case, we can also try to assess them as like the likelihood will be the user who can remote access to these computers. So we're trying to assess the local administrators and the remote desktop user as a combined values, and this also means that remote management user can be combined as well, and therefore we have the likelihood for the attacker who can compromise these computers, and for the lateral movement for the next attack vector inside this attack path.
Okay, great, thank you.
I have a question. Do you have published a list of already performed assessments for attack paths, for typical attack paths and attack vectors? Something like a table?
I think we're still working on that. It will be released soon. So the first thing we're trying to do is we have published the white paper, and the next thing we'll release the attack vector for this attack vector for the assessment.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Are there further questions? No? Thank you very much for your talk.